Alrighty, let's get this underway. It is the Siege Show presented by Jake and Guzz, episode 34, and a little bit of a delayed episode as well. We were supposed to do a reload recap, Guzz. We've been a bit busy and lazy, to be completely honest, but we're here now, and stage 1 preview to kind of go alongside this as well. Very quickly, we'll kind of wrap up reload, get into stage 1. Reload itself, we did the preview. If you think back, guys, episode 33, we were hesitant. We had obviously our initial thoughts as to the way we thought it was going to maybe play out. I mean, first and foremost, it was fun, and there were certain elements that did end up working. And I think this was probably my talking point regarding Reload in the previous episode was I imagined there were going to be some things that worked and some things that didn't. Overall, though, I think it was still a tournament that lacked overall competitive integrity based on format, based on invited teams, but there were certainly some fun elements. Like I think the chicken card stuff that ended up happening with Milosh and all of the players huddled up in a circle like they're getting ready for a school photo. The 1v1s had some enthralling encounters and certainly made the day a lot of fun. But unfortunately, these are just things that don't necessarily translate to competitive Siege overall in the overall landscape. So it's really hard to take a lot from Reload and think, could you ever find a way to actually take elements and include it into Rainbow Six Esports program? Probably not.
Yeah, I agree. I would probably describe it as a fun but flawed event. As you sort of mentioned, the complexities, whilst making it a little bit more challenging to follow, definitely did allow some fun moments to arise. The 1v1s were hype. The chicken cards, as you mentioned, were also pretty entertaining. But the format did also lend itself, especially how the wagering system worked. There were various moments throughout the event where it was pretty much you were better off losing than you were winning. And I think any format that encourages that kind of behavior puts teams and obviously organizations in a weird spot, and it's just not great. So could it be revised and revitalized and brought back? I mean, potentially, but as we've probably, said a couple of times, we at least believe, or at least I believe, it's very, very unlikely that we're going to see the light of day of this particular format ever again, which in some respects is a bit of a shame. I again, really stand by the wagering system in its purest form as actually being quite entertaining, but we took it a step too far, in my opinion, and unfortunately, those issues arose. But I think overall, the event was still pretty entertaining. Obviously, some cool storylines going into the final stage. You had the Liquid and Cyclops drama. Cyclops then eventually going on to make the grand final, first appearance ever for APAC. And sure, you could definitely make an argument that they got the free side of the bracket, and I don't think anyone's going to complain or argue about that all too much in comparison to the other half of the bracket, but still it was a monumental moment really for the region, and I think they deserved to make it to the grand final given the quality of the Siege that they did actually end up presenting. Taking out Fearx as well was a pretty big moment too. The Korean super team got a lot of hype at this event, and I think rightly so, and I'm keen to see how they perform in APN. But yeah, I think there were some positive takeaways. Some interesting storylines that develop, that can be developed throughout the remainder of the year. But I do agree with you that you can only take so much from it, really. Like, how many teams are actually taking this seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, to be frank, like, I can't confirm these kinds of rumors that we hear at events and stuff, but there didn't seem to be a strong consensus that many teams were screaming and practicing a lot at this event. Like, it seemed like it was a little bit more of a glorified holiday, which, again, was kind of the vibe of the event, really, from the get-go, but coincides with the point that I wouldn't be walking away from this like, wow, Cyclops are going to, be like one of the best teams in the world going forward, and yada, 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 and this team sucked because they didn't make it through and all that. Like, I wouldn't be taking a whole lot from it, really.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of look at Cyclops and their run. They had a 7-4 win over Aleve, and they had a 7-5 win over Liquid, then beat Fearx 2-1 in the quarterfinals, which was a really good moment, at least for APAC, to see those two teams play off, stage environment, and then for CAG to go on and beat Wildcard in the semi-final to then make the grand final, where ultimately, Furia, which is too good. And I think that's going to be certainly a takeaway for me. Is this the return to form potentially for Furia? Moving forward now, there's a little bit more expectation on them to kind of get back to their, little glory era that they had at the end of at the start of last year. So I'm curious to see how that follows up. If you look at the actual group stage overall, there's a couple of outliers like CAG a 2-2 record, Elevate a 2-2 record, and the teams that Elevate actually played were the two teams that didn't even win a game in Scars and PSG Talon. So Elevate kind of got, the very fortunate side of things in terms of their draw and when and how they used their bullets to get the necessary bullets to qualify on at the end of day 4. So then W7M 3-0, that's fine. Falcons 2-2, which again, it's another 2-2 team that made it through based on the way that they used their bullets, and the teams they beat were Wildcard and VRX. VRX, though, at this tournament obviously played quite well. And speaking of them, they went 4-1, Wildcard 4-1, and Furia 4-1. So you kind of had this mix of teams that were performing very well. Like, if you look at VRX's run, they beat CAG, who ended up making the grand final. They beat G2 7-1, beat SSG 7-3, and beat the newly formed BDS roster 7-5. The only loss being that Falcons one, so they ended up getting enough bullets to go through. Wildcard's run as well, beating out G2, SSG, Team Secret 7-2, along with Scars. You're noticing that, there's a couple of easy wins in there, and that's certainly, elevating certain teams. But if you look at the teams that end up missing out and losing out, like SSG lost to Dark Zero, they lost to Furex, and they lost to Wildcard. It's not like they had this horror run where they ran into all of the top Brazilian teams or anything along those lines. SSG very much underperforming at Reload, and there were a lot more expectations on that roster coming into an event like this. You looked at also a couple of the teams like Fnatic, which we, in the previous episode, were talking about which teams do we think maybe didn't necessarily belong in an event like this. Would they qualify if it was an invite? They only got the one win, which was a 7-0 against Scars, ultimately then losing 7-3, 7-3, and 7-2 to the likes of DZ, Loud, and FaZe. So they were just not really that competitive. So not too surprised that they, eventually bombed out. PSG Talon, Scars, pretty much dreadful. Didn't win a single game, which was very disappointing. So, I think we were pretty on the money for the most part. Some of the ones we missed out, maybe like Wildcard had a very, very good run, beat some good teams, made a semi-final. I'd say that was a miss on my part when I kind of had them as being maybe a team that you kind of look at in their region. Would they qualify? You look at the fact that there wasn't a Shopify Rebellion at an event like this. So that was probably the big one. Fear X as well was the big one. So I'd say those were the two real surprises. Thought Loud played quite well overall as well. And curious to see more from M80. M80 kind of had most of the drama related to the format, and that was what I saw a lot on Reddit was, how is M80 3-2, but they aren't qualifying because obviously the bullet system, they beat out Cloud9, they beat out Falcons, they beat out and smashed PSG 7-0. And their one loss as well against W7M was an 8-7 back on day one, and then the other loss, a 7-1 smashing by Secret. So, I think when you kind of look at it overall, when it comes to Reload, as a standalone one-off, have a bit of fun, I think I don't even know if I would call it a success, but I think it was fine. Like, I think largely it was fine if it stays as a one-off. And that was my notion kind of coming into the event. And I think you've mentioned this a couple of times now. The wagering system probably could be tweaked and looked at, but it's throwing in all these cards, which a lot of them didn't even really get used. It made it more confusing, and they're not really cards that you play. I think the chicken card was essentially the only one that you actively play, and everything else was almost like an automatic card that sort of activated if a certain...
and the extended mag and shit, but like...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was what really tipped it over the edge of just being a little bit...
Yeah, so I think if you kind of looked at the system and you kind of picked it apart, and you probably could find something where if we are to do these almost like share program invite tournaments to kick off the year, you could probably find some balance that makes it fun but also competitive. And ultimately, if this was to ever happen again, you go from 20 teams to 24 teams, 4 teams qualify in. Any tournament that you have to have competitive integrity, which, it still had a very good prize pool overall. It was like $500,000. Yeah, it was 500K. So like you need to have qualifier spots in there. And that just adds a little bit more element. There's no SI points or anything, but it's still a lot of money. Overall, I would probably give Reload like a B. Would you give it like a B or maybe C+? I'd go a B.
I think in terms of an event, I would say like a C+, pretty forgettable. But then combine like my personal experience at the event, which was largely quite positive, I would say probably elevates it to like a B-. So,
yeah. I agree with that.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to harp on too long. I just very quickly want to circle back to a singular point because you raised SSG there, and we love a bit of banter. We love some interaction with the community here on the show. I'm just having a look back at the sheer volume of comments that especially were directed towards you during our preview for this event. You went too red on SSG. I actually had them in my 8, and sort of as you alluded to, they kind of bombed out at this event. Other NA teams impressed, but not them. I mean, there's one in particular asking who your crack dealer is. That confident that SSG were going to do well at this event. So I mean, you could stick it up them because they did not perform.
Nah, it's fine. I think in hindsight, when we got to the event, I remember day one when they won, and I was like, damn, I think I might have missed the mark here. And then, as we know, they kind of bombed out. I think it's a really good roster, and I think it just needed a little time, and probably just not the kind of event that a team of that caliber is. As you kind of pointed out, a lot of the teams weren't necessarily scrimming and giving it 110%. I think SSG's got a very good roster. I think they'll certainly be a team to watch in NAL. We're going to move forward very quickly now to the new ban phase as we kind of go into now this new era of Siege, Siege X, and a couple of roster changes, stage 1 previews, all of that kind of stuff. I know I've been pretty vocal about this on broadcasts, co-streams, things like that regarding the new ban system, but I'm very much in favor of it. I think already so far we're seeing a really good shakeup as to the meta basically built around the new ban system and the way that it works out. So many different ways that you can convolute plans, whether it's preset plans, like we're going to double hard breach ban, or we're going to double shield ban, or double info ban, whatever it may be. And then there's more the target bans. It's like we want to take away, certain operators from a particular individual or two. And then it's map dependent bans, for example. So you're going to have certain operators that statistically perform better on certain maps. It just feels more open. And I initially, when heard about the ban system, my first thought was, is this going to slow down an already incredibly slow paced game when it comes to broadcasts? And I feel like it doesn't. I mean, someone ran the maths. I can't remember who, but essentially it's not any slower than the previous ban system. So with that said, I think this has actually turned into a really positive change for the game. And I'm sure at some point, probably a year or 2 years from now, guys, it might get stale or whatever it may be. But for the most part, I think it's been largely successful.
Yeah, I think on top of all the interactions you've kind of alluded to, the one that I really quite like, I don't really have a term coined for it yet. Kind of like the poker interaction or the bluff interaction. And that's like the very specific operator combinations and counters that you typically see in a Siege game, and the kind of plays we see around that, especially for like the round 4 ban or the round 9 ban phase. And I think like a really classical example that we saw throughout the event is, like, let's say the mirror is available, right? And if it has been or could be potentially impactful for the remaining rounds in the half, like we see that very interesting decision, right? As to, do we see the Twitch taken off the board to bolster the mirror windows, or do we, call the bluff and just ban the mirror entirely? Those kinds of interactions have been really interesting and have added another layer. And I think that teams that, especially as it gets a little bit more developed and there's more data, those that can analyze data correctly and more efficiently are really going to be able to benefit, from that. I mean, Siege isn't exactly the esport program with the highest volume of games, so it's not like I don't think you're going to be able to min-max it to the absolute nth degree that you might be able to in like a Counter-Strike, where you have so much more data and play the same team so much more regularly. But I still think that it's going to add some nice complexity. It changes the dynamics on maps as well. I know the example we've mentioned a few times is, obviously like Bank, Kanto Wall. If you take away the Habana Ace, you take away the ranged hard breach. I think it was Fett that first mentioned this. That like entirely changes the site, and I think we're going to see more and more examples of that. Another more simple example is, again, if you take away like trip hard breach and you're attacking like a basement site, like Chalet is a good example. That changes how that plays out dramatically. So I think at least for the next 12 to 24 months, it should be pretty fresh. How the meta itself develops around that and the game more on a wider scale, we'll see how it actually performs. But ban phase needed a change. I like the fact that they didn't just switch to 6. This is probably a good example of, they complicate or changes the system a little bit, but it actually so far seems to be for the better. So I'm enjoying it, and even by extension, I think in like ranked and unranked as well, it's also been pretty fun. So
Yep.
yeah, looking forward to people understanding it more, and yeah, keeps it nice and fresh for comp, which is good.
I've definitely found the enjoyment when playing CJX with regards to the new ban system. It's definitely been enjoyable. In fact, I remember we were playing the other night, and I think it was like after a couple of games, I was like, oh, I kind of need to start taking notice to like what the opposition's playing, so that when we get into because it keeps popping up and I'm like, wait, what are they playing again? Like that's something that you kind of have to keep note of, at least for individuals playing ranked, more so probably than at the pro level, for example. So it's a case for me where it's like, from a individual aspect playing it, sometimes this is obviously an esports show, but we kind of at times forget it's a game first and foremost, and that people are going to be playing ranked or people unranked or whatever it may be. And this is a really good change, I think, in that element of the game as well. So at the core foundation level. Stage 1 preview shenanigans, and we're going to kick it off with some of the biggest news. Of course, stompn to G2. It was rumored. There was a lot of socials regarding him going over to G2. There were predictions. People started to say it's happening, and then eventually it just transpired. stompn, for those unfamiliar, of course, a very talented young gamer who started on console, incredibly popular in terms of the socials as well, and transitioned to, I believe he went to tier 2 NA to begin his transition to PC, and now he's picked up by G2, sensing that he's just incredibly talented, worth having a shot. G2, a roster that has probably struggled in recent times and maybe feels like a freshen up. It's an intriguing move for a couple of different reasons for me. One, he's still so raw, and to kind of go from that tier 2 to tier 1 jump, but also to go straight to EML, straight to a team like G2 as an American. That is not something you really see all that often. Usually it would be maybe vice versa, where like a star EU up-and-comer gets bought out by like an M80, for example. But the other way around, to go see an American heading over to Europe, I mean, it's a huge ballsy move from G2 to make that happen. Of course, it means that Uno was made way. Whether he's got what it takes, I think, is irrelevant. I just think it's a kudos to G2 to take a ballsy move. Clearly, stompn's someone that also has a lot of social presence, so you're getting following and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's just probably in a position with their roster where it's like, let's take a risk. And if it doesn't really work, let's be honest, this roster's probably going to need to be blown up to some degree anyway. But if it does work, it could pay absolute dividends. And it doesn't have to work straight away. There's a lot of time as well with the format this year, kind of stage 1, EWC, then stage 2, then the major. So the major's a long way away, which means for stompn and G2, they're going to get some really, really good time in over the next 4 to 5 months before the official major. But it certainly was quite surprising to see him leave North America. I do wonder, I don't know internally if, there were North American organizations that were looking to offer him anything in tier 1. And even more so surprising considering that North America saw quite a lot of change in rosters coming into this stage. I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm very curious. There's going to be a lot of eyes on EML. From recording this, it starts in a day. They'll play Wolves first up, which is, of course, now a British team, formerly a French team, but now a British team with Wolves plus Noodles. So, very curious to see how that's going to go. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the kid. A lot of pressure on the kid. He hasn't even got a Liquipedia page yet. He's the only. He's got
Really?
He's got a red name on Liquipedia. Like, that's how fresh this is.
Yeah, I was quite surprised to see the G2 transfer in the end. As you kind of are alluding to, an American player to EU is pretty much unprecedented. So it's really interesting from that perspective. And I think the way that I would probably frame this storyline for him is, I think that G2 benefit far more greatly from this than probably stompn will. And my reasoning behind that being that I think in terms of his development, I don't really see G2 with that roster and that coaching lineup being as good for development as perhaps some other rosters would be. But I do also believe that he has the raw skill and ability to strengthen that roster, which has been going through turmoil for quite some time. So I think he can come in, boost G2. Is it to a position in which they can find dominance in EML? Kind of hard to say at this point in time because we need to see how they actually gel inside of the server. But there's kind of a cynical part of me that is concerned that stompn could go into this team and maybe pick up the bad habits that have led G2 kind of down this road over the last year or so, right? So I'm watching with intrigue and promise, and obviously not preying on things going wayward because it's obviously big for the game more generally as well. If he is able to go in and perform well and do like, a Bolo-esque run, that'd be massive, right? He'd be kind of like the new gen Bolo. So I'm excited. We'll see how he performs. As you mentioned as well, back on the M80X roster in Challenger League, like he was posting great numbers. That team was unfortunately not particularly strong in the end ultimately, and the results kind of determined that, but he played well. I don't think he's going to have too many issues in finding his footing in EML. But again, I'm kind of concerned just in terms of the longer term prospects. If he does pick up bad habits now, it's kind of at the worst possible time when you're learning and developing the habits of a tier 1 player. You don't want to go in and learn these habits and then have to unlearn them later on in your career, right? So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully G2 can flip things around, in terms of culture and team dynamics and whatever else has been going on for that team to slide off the radar a little bit recently.
Another big addition is Lagonis to Wildcard as their new head coach, which I think is a fantastic pickup, astute sighting, and one that actually makes sense with Lagonis and Dash combination from the old Team 1 Esports days. They played at the 6 Charlotte Major together, a couple of Brazilian stages. Not a super lengthy amount of time between those two in their time on Team 1, but still history there. And I think Lagonis is someone who, he's still actually relatively young, but has been around such a long time now. And I think sometimes you kind of look at people go into that coach role and you think they've got to be 26, 27, 28, but I think he's like 23 or 24 or something like that. But I think that's still where you've got that mindset that you still want to be competitive. You're not kind of in your retirement stage. You're still active, but now just active as a head coach. I think it's a solid pickup. I think Wildcard obviously had a very good tournament in Reload. To then go in and throw, sort of Lagonis on top of this roster. It's a young, fun roster, but then Lagonis brings in, a little bit of that establishedness and I hope, prestige to a roster that is kind of making its way in North America right now. I like it. Doesn't necessarily mean for me, I think it's going to tip them over some of the other top teams in North America, your Dark Zeros, your Shopify's, for example, and the way that M80 is going right now as well. I kind of look at those three as definitely being ahead of Wildcard, and you can probably throw Space Station in as well. So you can clearly see how stacked North America is right now, and that's not even including a team like Cloud9, who I think is still actually maybe a little bit underrated. So I think the addition of Lagonis keeps Wildcard, despite a very good reload, but again, it's reload, in that conversation where they're trying to contend in North America where it's very top heavy.
Yeah, Wildcard are a strange amalgamation, and I really did not, and I think many would probably agree, did not expect much of them at all from Reload. And yes, it has the Reload asterisk on it, but still a top 4 at an international event is still, a very respectable performance, all things aside. So I'm excited to see them play out this stage, and I think that they're a chance, to creep into the top 4 of NA, but as you're kind of alluding to, is incredibly top heavy. Like there is some fierce competition. Shopify not at Reload, like it's going to be tough. And they didn't get off to the greatest of starts in that first playday, losing to Cloud9, as you have mentioned. Another roster that's a little bit of a dark horse as well in NA. Probably not quite as much given some of the personnel on that team and the Dream Effect, and obviously quite a likable roster. But yeah, like it's cutthroat in NA, which is I think really, very much exciting from a fan perspective. I think regionally, outside of the shenanigans we'll get up to with APAC playoffs, etc., by far and away the most interesting region to me, at least for Stage 1.
Well,
so
I think we'll just kind of transition naturally then into the Stage 1 preview. We'll kind of then end on the APL stuff and that region. So North America was one I kind of had that I wanted to quickly look at first, because they've played 2 play days, so there's a little bit more information there. And then sort of a rough prediction as to where we think it may end up, regarding this region. Now, to preface, in terms of stage 1, the vast majority of what teams are fighting for is certainly going to be SI points. It's changed a little bit from last year, so there's more points on offer, and finishing first, second matters a lot more, guys, in terms of SI points distributions in comparison to last year, where
scales like crazy.
It was like 5 points the difference between first and second, and now it's 150 points between first and second. It is incredibly different, and it puts so much more emphasis on the leagues, for all of the leagues this year. And then there's also the Esports World Cup, which of course is separate to the circuit that Blast runs, but it is there. They are using the respective leagues as a means for their invitations. It's there. So top 4 from North America do get spots at the Esports World Cup, and that's where all the points are as well. When it comes to the 2 play days that they've played so far, I don't think there's anything that's surprised me off the bat. I think that when you kind of look at this region, it's, again, very top heavy. I think there's some really, really solid teams and solid talent, but it's like, how do you kind of fit them all in? You've got maybe 5, 6-ish teams that are essentially fighting for 4 spots, but more importantly, how many of those can get first and second for the vast majority of those SI points? So very quickly, having a look at some of the results, M80 off to a great start, 2-0. Dark Zero off to a great start, 2-0, beating teams that they both respectively should be beating, so nothing crazy there. And also good to see an old org in Envy back in Rainbow Six as well. Shout out to them. But I don't particularly think that team's going to do all that well. I think when you kind of look at the bottom end, it's like Envy, Cruelty, LFO are probably the 3 that are just kind of going to make up the numbers. And then it's like Wildcard and above, as the current standing 7-1, which does include Oxygen, who you could throw certainly into that dark horse category. They got actually a win over Cruelty, slightly competitive against DZ. But Wildcard was the big one. You touched on it. They lost to Cloud9, which I would kind of put those 2 teams around the ballpark as, of the 2, they're going to be almost like fighting for a 4th or 5th kind of spot. And then Wildcard respond the next day and beat SSG, but only in overtime. So again, I think it's going to show the likes of like Wildcard, Cloud9, SSG, Oxygen. It's going to be this like little 4-man battle royale, whereas the top 3 looks a little bit more clear to me. Shopify, M80, and Dark Zero. I'm very hot on M80. I think Fabian's doing some really good things there. I think their roster changes as well have worked. And Dark Zero is a very core, stable roster. And Shopify, I still think, has the best potential, the overall potential in the region. So those 3 for me stand out. And then it's like this like 4 or 5 team amalgamation to kind of round out NAL, which makes it exciting. It's very disappointing that NA is like the worst time zone for us to watch, because I actually think it's a very entertaining region in terms of competitive siege.
Yeah, I totally agree. NA is definitely going to be a fun region to watch, and that kind of 4, 5, 6 battle for the final spot at EWC, and I guess even by extension pushing that up a little bit for the 150 points and more for first and second. Yeah, it should be one of the most competitive in the world. So yeah.
So South America League, of course, the Brazilians, there's a couple of Argentinians in there as well on 9Z team. They have also kicked off, but they've only played the 1 play day. Play day 2 actually is tonight. Nothing too crazy in those results. Honestly, the matchups really just weren't there. I think maybe W7M versus Liquid, but W7M just far too good. And it feels like Liquid has really fallen behind in this region now. Like Furia, W7M, FaZe, and even to some degree, you could argue Loud are all ahead of Liquid right now. That's concerning if I'm a Liquid fan, and they've got such a large fan base. I don't know what you do with this organization / roster to kind of change things up. You know, I thought coming into Reload, you know, maybe the addition of Ask was going to be something that could help them, but I don't know. Like Diaz coming in as well Does this just need a full nuke? Like, does Liquid just nuke this roster and just go? But I don't even know what you pick up because
you can't be saying nuke and Liquid in the same sentence. Hey, what are you doing?
I can't be doing that. That's just okay.
Come on. I thought you were always making an intentional bit there. But
that was actually
you're just being careless.
That's just me being careless. Which that whole situation in itself is.
We don't have any sponsors on the.
I don't. There's no Honda on the Jake and Guzz podcast. But it's not like they can go and Liquid's a big org, right? But FaZe is a big org. Furia is a big org. Is there a world in which you could ever buy out the W7M roster? I doubt it.
Is it worth it?
And is it? Yeah. So it's like you kind of stuck as this like 4th, 5th team. So do you kind of look to break this roster apart and maybe find a way to find a rebuild roster and pick a young core group of players and try and ride their success as they grow? I don't know. I don't know what Liquid do from here. But I do like the position of Loud, FaZe, W7M, Furia. Those 4 teams from the South America League, I think, are going to be the ones to represent in the international events.
Yeah, okay. I think breaking into the top 4 will be tough. Liquid historically would be the ones knocking on the door, but they continue to weaken it would seem. There's not really another roster jumping out. It's probably cracking into that lineup, right? I mean,
I'd say like
an NIP.
I was going to say an NIP could almost even, and that's even scary for Liquid if NIP starts to get to their level.
Yeah, like it's a big jump. I think it should be pretty safe for the top 4 at least for the first stage of SAL.
Yeah. Looking at Europe, which has not begun yet, I think they start the.
We'll see how quickly I edit this, but
well, I mean, from us recording this, they haven't started yet. So we kind of just look at it as a full blown preview, and certainly a region that, man, talk about changes when it comes to not only the fact that it's gone from EUL to EML, which of course is the MENA edition, which of course none of the MENA teams were able to qualify into the EML, and I imagine that's just going to be the way it is for them now. It's unfortunate. I loved seeing those MENA teams, the old GK, the old like Falcons, for example. It's just a shame, but it's also a reality of condensing the Siege circuit to the 4 region format with APL, EML, NAL, and SAL. It's just the reality that someone was obviously a couple of regions were going to just be pushed to the side a little bit. So obviously we touched on stompn to G2, the new BDS roster, which we got to see at Reload, which again, I think in my preview, I was pretty high on them. I had them in my top 8. I expected a little bit more, but I also added a caveat. I look at this roster as time investment. Like this is the kind of roster that you just got to give them some time. If it doesn't click in 8 to 12 months, then yeah, maybe you kind of change things up a little bit, but they got so much back-end staff behind them as well. Laloon, Eden, Helby. I think it's a great core roster. Virtue's been around a long time. I think he's still playing some really good Siege. Robbie was unfortunately not great at Reload. He needs to get back to his best. And that's going to be the task for Robbie this stage and the rest of the year, Guzz. Was he a one-hit wonder? His run in Montreal was sensational. But it's like, can he get back to that height? That's what BDS needs out of him.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tale as old as time with Siege, right? Is consistency, especially if you're a top fragger, actually maintaining that level across stages or even going further years is so difficult. There's so few players that have been able to do that. But ironically, we continue to transition more and more into a meta where everybody on the team needs to be firing. So it's going to be critical for him to step up. He has the team and I think the support staff as well around him. Like BDS have the resources and the know-how, I think, to be a strong contender in this region. But are they really going to be knocking on the doors of the top teams? Hard to say. I don't really see Falcons being knocked off that top spot just yet. But I guess on the flip side, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Falcons will retain top spot. And it'll be a bit of a dogfight for the remainder of the region. But Falcons also need to ensure that they don't get overly complacent, because I think a lot of those teams knocking on the door have decent development pathways. The BDS roster, I think Secret showed quite a bit of promise. Give Wolves some time; they'll probably be okay. If stompn is able to carry G2 and revitalize that team as well, give them 6 months, and they could be quite competitive. So that for me is probably the big storyline for EML is Falcons at least expected to continue to do well. I don't see them getting knocked off that top peg, but they need to be very, very careful that they don't let any form of complacency set in, which I don't think they will. Like, I think that's just a bit of a fantasy stretch in my mind. Like, I hope that Falcons continue to have that drive, not only locally but internationally. Like, they haven't finished the job. Like, they haven't achieved what they want outside of performances at EWC. So I hope that hunger is still there, and kind of propelling them towards SI Paris to finally lift the hammer. Like, that has to be the ultimate goal for them still.
What about Fnatic? Talk about an organization that just could never seem to find stability. They brought in Groovy and Jaxu prior to Reload, and then Jaxu immediately after Reload is moved to the bench, and they go and pick up Wizard from Cool Intentions. For those unfamiliar with Wizard, he was the highest rated player in the EML Challenger playoffs. In fact, if you look at the rest of his roster, so he had a 1.37 rating, which was tied the highest in the Challenger playoffs. The rest of his team was 0.8 to 0.71. He had a 1.37. That is incredibly high numbers. And to sometimes you can have high numbers, but it's like, where's the impact? He was 9-2 on entry. 9-2 on entry. The rest of his team was not good on entry. He had a 70% cost, despite his team having 4 players going negative. And he had a 1 KPR. The rest of his team was averaging around 0.5 to 0.6. And I think when you kind of look at a lot of his numbers, it's like it stands out that this is clearly a player who needs to make it into tier 1. I wouldn't put him at like stompn level in terms of rookies coming in this stage, because there's so much hype around stompn. But I do want to add that Wizard coming into this stage as well is similar in terms of a big rookie coming into tier 1, a little bit of unknown about him. Again, like stompn, doesn't have a Liquipedia page, played tier 2, etc. He is one to watch. I'm excited to see what he can do with Fnatic. I felt like this Fnatic roster, when it was put together with Jaxu, if you keep it together, could find stability, could find competitiveness, but Wizard might be the man to push him over the top a little bit if he's that good, if he's going to play that well. It's just such a stacked region. Of course, Falcons, unchanged. Team Secret, we got to see them over at Reload. I think there was good enough performances from there that they're going to be around the mark, but without blowing anyone away. The new Wolves, of course, being a former French team, now a full British team, except for Noodle. Obviously, Virtus Pro, talk about stability in this region. VP always feels like, because they're so stable,
always in the mix.
They're always in the mix, and they're always a little bit like under-regarded. And yet then they go on, they make a major, and then they make a top 4, and like they always just seem to go on those runs. Gen G, of course, as an organization, huge entry into Rainbow Six Siege. Of course, they picked up Ence's license spot. So you've got Deadshot, Azza, Nako, and Skies. I mean, I don't know really how this team's going to go. I feel like they're probably on, the precipice. And then you got Mako Esports, my lovely Italians, and then Wild to kind of round it all up. I think that, if I'm going to be completely honest, I look at this region and I just think it screams top heavy. Like, some of these teams, and it's going to be really difficult, because like, how does a Wild, say, stack up versus an OXG? Like, how would you kind of look at those teams? How would a Mako stack up against, like, a Cloud9 or one of the more middle pack teams in NAL? It's really difficult to know. Obviously, we kind of know how the top teams can perform, but honestly, as I'm glancing over these rosters, I look at Falcons. We know what Falcons are going to be able to provide. Fnatic, Secret, BDS, the new G2 roster. Could you trust any of those 4 teams at an international event against the top NA, top Brazilian teams, and right now maybe even the top APAC teams? Okay, that's a little bit of a stretch, but you get where you get where I'm going with this, though, Guzz. Right?
Email does not instill a lot of trust at the moment. Falcons, again, should continue to be reliable, but all of these other rosters, many of which are properly untested, and I guess that kind of does to an extent apply to many teams across many regions, but EU especially, it just feels like there's a lot of untested dynamics going into this stage. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see how it plays out. I'm not probably quite as excited on a domestic level for EML, but as you're kind of alluding to, the teams that do qualify, how do they stack up against the rest of the world? Because they drop the ball a bit at reload. Sure, you get a pass at that event, but that can't continue.
Yeah, I think there should be a big stage.
How do they go in November?
If I'm a Virtus Pro, I'm thinking with a bit of instability in the region, but you're a core stable team. Falcons as well.
Like, I think they should be going in and like, sure, everyone's going to be fighting for number one, but if you want to be realistic, I think VP, like, let's cement second in this region and let's really knuckle down and take down Falcons. Like, that's got to be the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know, Falcons, that aura is diminishing a little bit, right? They have to probably regain some of it as a team, especially after Reload and then, again, being that team now labeled the chokers when they do get to finals. That's, something you got to get that monkey off the back. But yeah, very curious to see how the region goes. What can this Wolves roster do? Good old Leader and Noodle. Can they bring some of their APAC expertise back to EU? And honestly, then not a bad time for G2 to bring in stompn and just try and maybe overtake a couple of teams. I think BDS, if they can click together, they can do well. So it's going to be a very, very open region outside of maybe top two. And then brings us to the Asia Pacific League to kind of round out our stage one and episode. We've got a little bit to get through when it comes to APL because it's the region with the most changes. So as we know, last year, you had the Oceania League, you had Southeast Asia, you had Japan, you had Korea. It's all technically condensed into just the APAC League, but technically not. Like, it's still really... OS is in their own region and SCA is in their own region and so forth. Except for APAC North, now technically returning. So there's no more Korea League and there's no more Japan League. That's the big change. They're now combined into Japan and Korea as being APAC North plus one Brazilian team. And then obviously for Southeast Asia, it's all the Southeast Asian teams plus one Brazilian team. And when it comes to Oceania, it's all the Oceania teams plus one EU team. So... I'm stirring the pot a little bit here when it comes to APAC. So obviously the Oceania League has kicked off. Now regarding the broadcasts related to this, I saw like obviously a couple of Reddit threads and discussions for the Asia Pacific League. It's co-streamed for group stages for all of the regions, and then the playoffs will be broadcasted in studio by obviously our crew. And the reason for this, and people look at it as like a budget thing, but it's like, you've got two LANs at the end of this, you got two LANs throughout this year. You have to kind of take budget from somewhere, and I can kind of somewhat understand. There's a lot of regions here. Essentially, you've got the three different regions when it comes to the Asia Pacific League. That's a lot of broadcasts. You've got LANs. I get it. I would say the one thing that sucks the most is I think the co-streams need to be better advertised, better. Like it really should have just been like kind of get our crew to just like co-stream it on the main channel or something at the very least. Could have been done so much better, and that'll be my hope for maybe stage two if it ends up following this same pathway. That for stage two maybe we can find a way to just do it better and make it more condensed, make it a little bit easier for visibility. That's going to be the biggest thing. So hopefully we can kind of, and I say we, internally give our feedback about how we kind of want to see it. And I'm myself personally looking at Reddit and people's thoughts and things like that, taking that on board, doing what I can to obviously maybe then bring that up internally. Oceania did kick off though, guys. We got to co-stream that one together. I was eating for probably half of it. There were some absolute stomps, very one-sided night. GG, way too good against Circular Spheres. Chiefs, way too good against Saga. And to be completely blunt and to not sit in the OS, chatter for too long. Once again, no surprise, it's basically GG and Chiefs, with one caveat being Enterprise Esports, who ended up beating True Synergy Gaming 7-2, looked very good. And they're the caveat because You got Bappin, Killerman, Fisher Guy, Relays, and Tuhant. It's a good roster. Are they as good as GG and Chiefs? I doubt it. I think they will be perennial third, which unfortunately perennial third in this region is not going to get you SI, and it's not going to get you majors. That's just the reality. They need to find a way to jump into the top two. Top two in O's. Like if you're top two O's, you're getting enough SI points and you're getting the ability to qualify for majors. So the only caveat being Esports World Cup, there's only the one slot, but everything else, if you're top two in O's, so for GG and Chiefs, there are pathways to the major and pathways to SI. Don't know if I can say the same for Enterprise if they're, the consistent third team. So their goal really is to try and upset the established order. As for how I would rate GG versus Chiefs, I honestly couldn't tell you. GG had a boot camp. I think they look good without looking super amazing. And I think Chiefs with the addition of Josh, who, probably looking at this as his last real chance at playing at a very, very high level. Sometimes it's easy to forget. Josh had a solid 3-year stint back on Knights when they were super competitive, kind of at the start of COVID. So throughout that COVID era. And then from there, he's been lingering, but just on teams that are not ultimately competitive. So he's back in a super competitive role. He knows that he needs to play at a very high level on this Chiefs outfit. And if he can do that, if Tex can refine some form, Quiz continues to improve, you know what you're going to get from Oda and Jigsaw. I would still have Chiefs as the number one seed, but GG are going to be right on their heel.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in terms of my preview for the region, top three heavy, Enterprise could maybe sneak in and play upset, especially if probably more so GG end up finding themselves a little bit unsettled. But yeah, both those top two teams played really well. Playday 1 was rather predictable and incredibly lopsided. So yeah, intrigued to see how it plays out. I mean, we kind of have to wait until June 17, so that will be Playday 3. That will be Enterprise GG. That will be a really good really good display as to where they're at. And then actually the Playday after that, funnily enough, is Enterprise v Chiefs. And I think after those two Playdays conclude, assuming everything else kind of goes to schedule regarding Chiefs winning the rest of their games and GG winning the rest of their games, if Enterprise haven't scalped at least one of those, the stage is essentially over at that point, right? Unless we get shock results. So yeah, Playday 3, Playday 4, I would very much be watching eagerly.
So moving on to the Southeast Asia, or I think it's actually just labeled as Asia. Yeah, it is. So just to Asia now. So Elevate, Fury, Weibo, Daystar, and obviously the rest. It's a region that hasn't really changed all that much. So obviously Elevate come in with their all-Brazilian roster. We've spoken at length regarding our dislike for this, not for the players. In fact, actually over in Reload, watching Elevate in their games and the way that they're performing, I actually thought, Romeo looked really, really good. Ion had some good moments as well. And again, I never want to get this the wrong way in terms of our thoughts on this. The players, there's no ill will to the players whatsoever, to the coaches or any of those guys. It's literally just from an organization had an APAC slot as a partner team and dumped their APAC team to pick up Brazilians. That's where the dislike is, and that's where it will remain. I don't like opening up the Liquipedia for the Asia League and there's a Brazilian flag. I don't like that. So Fury, of course, pretty much unchanged. Weibo, so Weibo's the interesting one, right? Picking up a couple of the players from the old Elevate roster in Speakeasy and Ape to join Hoven, Reaps, and Turd. I think when you kind of look at it at its core, it's supposed to kind of be then the amalgamation of like the old Elevate plus the old Bleed combined together to be this kind of like super team. Intriguingly enough, the initial Reddit thread regarding the post-match was not too high on Weibo in their performance. They only had a 7-4 win over Team Orchard, which is essentially the old Direwolves roster for what it's worth. Which is Hinjin, MC, Jackie Wu, Songler, and Scarlet. So again, pretty much the old Direwolves roster. And it was only a 7-4 win. I think that's a little bit harsh because I actually kind of rate Orchard a little bit. I think they've still got some really, really good players. But I think Weibo should be the team that if they play at their absolute best, gets out of this region and is competing to go to the major and competing to do well at the APL finals and competing to go to SI. Daystar, Felix, Jogor, Pika, Seal, and Souffle, which is like the old Direwolves roster as well. There's a lot of old Direwolves players that are.
I mean, they got smashed in Play Day 1 though against
they did. 7-3 by Soul's Heart, which is the old. My God, it's like
OG Elevate.
The OG Elevate. It's like the old Elevate. The OG Elevate minus Onigiri is Soul's Heart, formerly No Cap. This is a region that has had a lot of the same players. Like if you look at the Fury roster, Soul's Heart roster, Orchard roster, Daystar roster, Weibo roster.
There's a lot of familiar names.
There's a lot. Even a Rival 7 has guys like Roldini, which were like the Q Confirm days. Labyrinth as well. So the region hasn't probably seen too many new additions in terms of players outside of obviously fully the whole new Elevate roster, which does mean when it comes to Asia, which, you only go...
Like, how are we looking at this region then? Is this a case of it's Elevate and Fury top 2 and everybody else is on the fringe? Like, are there other teams that we're adding into that conversation? Because I think in some respects, I'm actually pretty optimistic.
I think it's a top 3. I think it's Weibo, Fury, and Elevate.
Souls and Weibo, like, you don't put Souls in the potential to sneak a top 2 at any point? I feel like they could.
I mean, they definitely could.
I don't know how committed they are, but if they're committed, I think they have the personnel and the experience. Like, they're
I9 popped
one
off.
of the most experienced teams.
Yeah, I9 popped off in their game against Daystar.
I9's kind of inconsistent though at times, so that could be a one-off, but we'll see.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, absolutely. I kind of look at Elevate, Fury, Weibo, Soul's Heart as like the big 4. And then I think the other 4 are kind of probably all just battling each other for whatever's left over. But yeah, which makes the region interesting. My only issue with this is we go from an APAC South era back in the Bleed days where they were so good, so dominant, and could actually go overseas and do well. And I look at these 4 teams that I mentioned, Soul's Heart, Weibo, Fury, and Elevate. Do I think any of those could actually do well internationally? That's where it's like I'm shaking my head a little bit and you're shaking your head a little bit. And it's sort of like, I'm not too sure of... I think out of those 4, it's probably still for me, maybe it's a little bit of cope, Weibo at their best. Like if they bring their absolute best, get the most out of that roster, prime Speakeasy, prime Reaps, Turd without, any issues, we know statistically can play well.
Like I think that team has a lot of skill, but I mean, who's the leadership? I guess it's probably Speakeasy really taking the reins on the team now with, like no mentalist figurehead, right?
It's still, yeah.
I don't know how much experience he really has in that position. Like,
it's a pretty,
obviously,
it's a pretty young team. It's a pretty young team. At 24, Speakeasy's the oldest player. The rest of them are like 20 to 22.
Again, like he has so much experience. He's been playing the game forever, but it's quite different going from Starfragger to figurehead for the team. And if you don't have that kind of leadership to gel everybody, it's just never going to work, especially at an international level. So,
and they did pick up
intrigued to see how they play.
Meepy as well to join Mentalist as a coach. That was picked up a couple of months ago.
I mean, also like specifically like
inside of the server. It has to be.
I know, like roster wise, I should clarify, but yeah, and again, I'm also like, what's the dynamic of this team like actually behind the scenes? Like, I still feel a bit icky about the whole situation that played out last time. Like, maybe it's cool. Like, I have no idea, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see how they go. Weibo again, potential at their best, top 2. They should be knocking out Elevate, to be honest, but I don't know if stage 1 is where we're going to see that.
I think the easiest way to look at Weibo is based on potential. For me, I would put them number 1 potential. But the reality and the current state, it's like Fury, Elevate.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, and Soul's Heart, I think, have got more stability. And then we get to the last region, which we are actually covering tonight as of recording this, which is the APAC North region. And it's, of course, the mix of the Japanese teams, the Korean teams. So you've got Scars, you've got CAG, you've got FearX, PSG Talon, Kinitro, D+ full Brazilian roster, Enterforce, and Mer Gaming. What makes this so exciting is if you look at Japan and you look at Korea last year, Guzz, in those respective regions, super, super top heavy. And now, because they're going back to the APAC North days where they're combining, it makes it a very fascinating region. Like, this is actually an incredibly cutthroat region. Don't forget with the way... No, it does, because SI points, if you're not finishing top 2, you're probably not going to make SI.
That's going to be my point. I mean, I'm just going to say it straight up. Cyclops and FearX are just going to dominate this year, and no one's going to get it close. I mean, I don't know how the D+ Brazil team will perform. Obviously, they're a big unknown factor because we didn't see them at Reload, and we don't really have the knowledge base in terms of Brazilian players. But Scars are shit. PSG have absolutely shit the bed, and that team's gone. They're not going to recover this year. And Kinotrope, Enterforce, they're not going to be competing against the top 2. Like, I'm going to just go complete contrast to you and say that this is by far the most boring of the 3 regions. Like, I really would be shocked if Cyclops and FearX just wiped the floor this entire year and none of the other teams get close.
Does that change if, say, a Scars gets an upset win against the CAG or a FearX and now throws...
But they're not going to. Scars are shit and PSG is shit.
Okay.
Am I wrong?
I can't necessarily... I can't disagree with you.
They did nothing at Reload. Scars have just continued to drop off since they showed success. And PSG have lost Fabian, and the team dynamic is horrible.
But Scars have always been the team that dominates locally, is able to beat teams like CAG locally. Can you not at least admit and say...
There's a 10% chance they upset a CAG. But is that even going to be enough?
Well, it throws the whole... If that happens, though...
I mean, it throws off the head-to-head, I understand that, but I still wouldn't be shocked if they then turn around next week and lose to fucking Kinotrope.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, I absolutely agree with that.
And none of the teams, none of those mid-tier to lower-tier teams in the region are touching FearX. Like, unless the glimpses we saw at Reload were like absolute cope, I'm expecting them to do very well this stage. So
it's a shame what's kind of like transpired regarding PSG talent. If you were to go back to when Fabian joined that roster, which was start of last year, I think it was after SI, and like the run that they kind of then had in their growth as well, it felt like, okay, we're getting another team from APAC that can perform, and just to see it dwindle away, and even though the roster itself is still largely the same, it's just like all competitiveness has evaporated to the point that, like you're saying, and I'm agreeing,
they're just shriveled. They've like shriveled into a form of their past self.
They're just not even in the conversation of FearX and CAG, and I would have Scars even above PSG talent right now. What about D? Yeah. What about D+ to kind of close things out, because they're a little bit more of the unknown. They're the unknown in this region. We know Enterforce, Mer, and Kinotrope. Is there a world in which this D+ roster just comes out and says, "This is our region now"?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard from some of the Brazilian fans and stuff, expectation isn't particularly high on this roster. So I still think that CAG and FearX are relatively well protected in the top 2, but I think they can certainly disrupt the rest of the region. I think the matchups against the likes of Scars and PSG are really going to be telling and benchmarking like where those 3 teams are. Like, I know I was probably quite harsh in my assessment of, Scars and PSG and flat out just calling them shit, but that really just stems from what we have seen in the past and compare that to where they are now. Like, you'd have to be insane to say that they just haven't dropped off. Like, that's just the unfortunate reality, and I'm not celebrating that. It's just the reality. And I just don't see a path forward for either of those 2 teams to step it up. And, by extension, I think that then opens up the 3rd spot for D+ to potentially ingrain themselves in the region.
And I said to close out, but Mer Gaming for me as well is probably still an absolute dark horse. Super, super heavy dark horse.
Yeah, they've got some pretty big names in the team.
Damali, Guard, like they've got some players that have performed highly in Korea. Ende and Hedy to round out the roster as well. And Hede's been around a very, very long time. Ende's a bit more of a strange one because at times he's coached, analyst, now playing. I have never known really what his role is supposed to be. He just seems to just toss and turn. But he's literally done all 3 roles: analyst, coach, and player. And right now he's playing. But for me, it's got to be FearX as definitely the number 1 seed and CAG the number 2 seed, which is just strange, isn't it? After CAG made a grand final at Reload.
Yeah.
But Fearex, when they were playing at their best, they looked really, really good. It's just it's surprising. CAG won that game.
They just got some live. Yeah.
If Fearex had won that game in the quarterfinal, they also would have made the grand final. I don't think you can debate that too largely. I think they would have also beaten Wildcard, made the grand final. And that's going to kind of wrap things up when it comes to Asia and really the episode as a whole. Stage 1, essentially starting up, and what have we got? The next 8 months or so, lots of Rainbow Six Siege, which is really good. It's been, a bit of a long break. We had Reload to kind of kick things off. All the hype has been around Siege X. I think this is the first time that we kind of begin the esports calendar with so much hype around the game itself. Like usually you go into that break period and it's just sort of like nothing and then esports again. But with the back end, obviously, of Six Invitational leading, I think it was like a month after they did the Siege X reveal panel in America. And then a little bit after that, you do Reload in Rio. And then a little bit after that, you obviously have the launch of Siege X, the campaigns around that launch, and now the esports. Siege has had a pretty good couple of months leading into this esports campaign. Lots of hype regarding young players like stompn. North America looking quite strong. It's definitely an exciting year ahead. I'm really looking forward to Stage 1, Stage 2, the major, SI. I couldn't tell you right now, who's going to go and win SI from here. It's not like there's a clear-cut candidate. Are Fury back? They won Reload. Can they be a top dog again? FaZe always are going to be around the mark. The Brazilians are strong. Can APAC, do well at a major, at an SI again? What was the last best result? Was it Bliss probably and Bleed when they made top 8?
That would have been top 4 at.
Besides Reload, obviously.
No. It would have been top 4. D+ back at Sweden.
No, but I'm talking most recent, like.
I don't get the question.
I'm saying so.
You said what was their best performance before Reload was Sweden. But if you're talking between those two, then it would have probably been top 8.
Yeah, it was probably poorly put more so by me, Guzz. I apologize profusely. I was saying more so the last time we saw APAC do anything of note probably was SI24.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to count that, I would probably still say Sweden, which was like fucking 4 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Which, that depresses me, so I'd rather not go that far back. I think top 8, we'll give a top 8, we'll take that one. Sure. I think for me, Stage 1 looks very exciting. I'm probably more excited, and I also think that the change that we had regarding the break period being after SI ended up being a good thing. Because usually this is like break period now. It's a strange times ahead. Let's wrap things up. Episode 34. Big thank you to everyone who tuned in, watched. Apologize again for the delay regarding the Reload recap. Truthfully, there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about, so figured probably better to just chuck it in with the Stage 1 preview. Everything's kicking off. Make sure you follow the channels. We are going to be streaming on your Twitch a couple of days, a lot of the time on my Twitch, Xenox Cast. If you're not following, make sure you give it a follow. We'll be sending out announcements regarding all of the co-streams for the Asia Pacific League. Obviously, hit that subscribe button so you can be motivated and notified. I don't know. I can't speak.
Notified.
This is the end of the Jake and Guzz show. Thank you very much for watching. And to our patrons as well, as always, make sure you guys, if you want more content in the Discord, the Patreon link, of course, as always, down below. Very much appreciative. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.